Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for January 29th, 2018. Sorry, 19. We're up to, Bryce Harper is probably signing with the Phillies today, so hopefully that shakes the market and Machado signs like in the next couple of days, and then we have a whole bunch of movement, because god damn it, the last two off seasons have been terrible. Anyway, we're up to Dances with Wolves. It's sort of another infamous Best Picture winner because it beat out Goodfellas, which, for the record, Goodfellas, I've seen it. I like Goodfellas. I don't think it's a better movie than Dances with Wolves. I think that's entirely genre bias. Because of Goodfellas being a crime movie, and for whatever reason, people just tend to really like crime movies, and I don't. In any case, Dances with Wolves is a Western, and that's really the way I'm going to approach this material, because I really, really, really like this movie. So let me bring up some trailers and some clips. It won 7 Oscars. It still has a relatively good tomato meter. I don't trust reviews made after the Oscars because of the whole backlash thing. Anyway, I'll see you in a sec. Okay, so Dances with Wolves is the Indian cavalry plot in the classical Western form, but with greater care taken to fleshing out, in this case, the Sioux Indian tribe, to make them three-dimensional and human beings, and they're not really the source of antagonism. The source of antagonism are the Pawnee, and then also the U.S. cavalry itself. So it's absolutely a revisionist Western. Now, with that being said, the movie does fall into both the white savior trope, because John Dunbar / Dances with Wolves, the character, ends up saving them mostly by leaving the tribe at the end, so the cavalry doesn't find them. And then also it conforms, especially the theatrical cut, a little bit more to the Nature's Gentleman trope or stereotype, which is holding the Sioux Indian society culture up as sort of an idealized, prolific thing. And so the movie's all about John Dunbar escaping the madness of Western civilization, and becoming, going native, and becoming a Sioux proxy member of that culture. So if those tropes bother you, this movie will bother you, and I actually accept the criticism. The movie is not perfect in that regard. It's infinitely better on relationship with Native Americans and classical Westerns from like the 30s and 40s, and I think even in the context of it being fitting the white savior and then the Nature's Gentleman trope, it ends up being relatively those tropes are present, but they're not, in my mind, not outrageous in this context, because of how much it's working within the Western form and having you can only revise so much within the context of a genre, and this movie doesn't go all the way, but it's a good half step. With all that being said, I think there's absolutely something very resonant about John Dunbar's story. I really like Costner in this film. I think he makes a perfect everyman. I know a lot of people don't find his performance weighty enough, but I find his restraint and almost indistinctness really working in the favor of the movie in terms of his performance, because you're supposed to project yourself on Dunbar, and he's just sort of a fed up soldier. So this scene right here is probably the most critical scene in the moment to set up the fundamental dynamics, because this is him trying to commit suicide during the Civil War, and he ends up expiring, breaking of the Confederate line, so he gets to go out west. But the whole point of it is he's to the point of being spiritually, psychologically broken, and it's because of the Western Moors being, again, so this is Nature's Gentleman, that the Western Moors are not civil, because again, it's flipping because the Western itself is about order being imposed in the wilderness. This flips it on the head. It's really saying the order and the orderliness of the Western society is actually chaos. And so he's just so tired of that he ends up needing to go to the frontier and then eventually becoming something like a Sioux, and then eventually having that, like, even that amount of society is not good enough for, is too much for him, so he ends up having to leave. I mean, that's like the character arc, and it's all the treatment of the Western Americans fits that sort of thing, where it's the madness of our Western culture. Or American culture, so that's why, like, that's why his commander who sends him to Fort Sedgwick pisses his pants and crazy and everything like that. But this scene right here really makes it very striking that that's the case. It's also why the cavalry ends up being the main source of antagonism. Okay, so this scene right here is one of his first interactions with the Sioux, and again, something of a nature's gentleman's trope is present. So there's a good in terms of the way this scene is put together, there's a pretty strong correlation or subconscious nature of the Sioux being like his horse, and everything like that, and because of the way in which the shots are put together. And then this beat right here of Wyndon is here coming back and yelling at him that he's not afraid is really important, because of course it's that standard trope in terms of writing where a guy starts off antagonistic and then they become best friends over the course of the story. And even though stuff like that is really obvious, there's something about this movie which is very, very striking, and it's a very good in terms of Western. Costner has sort of an innate sense of how a Western should be put together, because he's not actually a very good director, because his other movies are other than Open Range and Dances with Wolves, his other movies he's directed are very, very shitty. But for some reason he really connects to the Western. In this movie, the way in which the camera lingers and places characters in the context of vistas, it feels very much like a Western, and it feels like a classical Western, but with a much, much richer treatment and more realistic treatment of Native Americans than you got in previous Indian and cavalry stories. And it's because of that I really, really like it. And the thing you probably see that most with in terms of it being realistic is in the West. I like the fact that his horse won't allow himself to be still, and I like that joke. It's kind of a funny gag to me. And I like that the movie does actually take the time. I mean, the movie's 4 hours long, and so the movie ends up taking the time to develop the horse and the wolf character, which is cool. Anyway, like I was saying, so the movie is probably the best in terms of advising the Western form, because in the old style of in the 40s and 50s, the old Western, the Native Americans were very much treated like forces of nature, and they were very indistinct. And apart from being like culturally really irrelevant, just wrong in terms of how they were portrayed. And this movie took the care to actually do the research, and they brought in Sioux advisors and everything like that. The thing the movie is best at is showing each Indian character or Sioux character as having a different. They're distinct, and you don't like. There's starting in the 50s, you started to get this more in the Western genre, because you couldn't always just have them. But it's really this Dances with Wolves is really the first work that was really well received, where the distinction, you really see this with this character, because Kicking Bird, who is the guy on the right there, is getting the point, and Wyndon is here does not, and there it's two distinct individuals, and I really like that. And I also think the use of the Sioux language is very, very was good, because of how it really, really helped the story, and it made the story feel very realistic, and it gave the meeting here very, very meeting of the two cultures, a very realistic, weighty feel to me, and I love that Costner fought for this. And so, yeah, in some ways it's sort of a simple story, and you can criticize it for Nature's Gentleman. The director's cut corrects for that, because there's a couple of sequences that were added where the Sioux killed white settlers, which is sort of disturbing, but at least made them three-dimensional. But in terms of just being a great sort of Western, it's really good because you get scenes like this. Which is one of the largest action scenes ever made, that does not involve, there's no CG, there's special effects in the sense that there's mechanical buffalo and stuff like that, but there's no CGI in this scene. It's an actual wild herd that I think it was in Wyoming, might be the Dakotas, that they actually filmed for like a week. It's actually where most of the budget went, because it's such a big sequence, and it's not only exciting, but because this movie, it takes the time to develop the characters. It's like Two Towers or Zulu, because this is actually sort of the climax of the first half. This is the first half climax, and you spend about 2 hours before you get to this sequence, and so it becomes incredibly exciting and everything like that. And so the action stuff really feels great, and then with the cinematography, which is very, very lush, wide open vistas, it's very lyrical, and it's very much captures the Western spirit. And so, like, to me, this is like one of the best Westerns ever made, and because of it's so, again, I really like Westerns, but it has one foot in the traditional form because of the way in which the action scene, the fact that he's a cavalry officer, the fact that it's mostly dealing with law and order being imposed, so everything like that. But and then the vistas, and then the action sequences, the battle on the river, the pony, everything. And at the other hand, it has a 1 foot, knowing that the treatment of for Native Americans has never been fully formed, and it really does struggle to do that. And so, to me, it's a really great film, because it's traditional while being revisionist at the same time. Now, again, I understand that some people might still be annoyed that it does center whiteness, especially since this scene right here, this is him leaving, and in essence, him leaving buys them 13 years in the subtext of the movie, which absolutely does conform to the white savior trope. But again, I think tropes like that are only harmful when they are repeated. So it's not like any one film having a white savior trope is the issue. It's just that so many of them do, and in this case, he's sort of saving them for something he himself did, because he's leading the cavalry to them. And it feels really not okay. Like, it feels fine within the context of the movie, but it feels not as damaging as like in Avatar, for example. In that, and then the other thing I wanted to show about this scene is it has, again, because it conforms to the trope, winning this here is going to repeat his lines about "I'm winning here, don't you see me?" That I'm your friend, which again is a great, it's a pretty classic structure. Meeting a person antagonistic, and then you become friends at the end. Like, that's sort of the logic of the story. Logic of storytelling, but it really is resonant. So this scene right here, I think, is absolutely heartbreaking, especially since it ends with saying in 13 years they ended up submitting to white authority, blah blah blah, which is just, we committed genocide, which is not okay. And not like this movie makes up for that, but it's very, very poignant and resonant and lyrical to me. Now, so because of all of that, I'm going to go to the mat and say it's actually a better film than Goodfellas. I might review Goodfellas one day, but Goodfellas has that standard Scorsese thing where it's about violence and about the compelling nature of crime, and so it's just, to me, this film feels much more human and much more relatable than freaking Goodfellas. Anyway, so that will be it for Cubs and Culture. Have you guys a good day.